Hello, guys. Thank you. Where are you gone? Oh, there. For this wonderful introduction. And I think that the expectations are high. And I hope that I can bring you something which is interesting about leadership. So, what about leadership? Is that because I'm the natural born leader? Of course not. You are perhaps. So we prepared a small talk in which my son will do the real thing. He's the bright and smart guy, and I'm his father, and I'm from a different generation. So I'm perhaps the more experienced leader with all of misery that I'm going. So this is not a story about a hero. It's more about why is leadership important. But first, so you decided today not to lay in your bed and to watch Netflix, but you came and you are interested in hearing stories about leadership, about personal development, and that makes you already a leader because the other guys are in their beds and we are not. So we have to rule the world. It's okay, the technique? I don't know. Can there's some technical stuff here.
We
Can
can
you
hear you
hear me?
fine.
Or do you think move out? No, it's better. Okay, better. So we are doing that together, and he will focus on a project that Comenius now designs for European leaders or persons who want to be a good leader or a good person. It all starts with that, a good person. And that project he is directing is focusing on 6 values of the European Union. That will come after this. And in the end, he will play the piano, I hope. Is it true? No, he isn't. But first, Comenius. And what's that? I don't want to talk about Comenius Leergangen because that sounds cheap to me as a kind of advertorial. So it's more about Comenius, the person, and what's the intention of leadership around Comenius, and why am I directing that, and how? So, you know, let's say 20, 30 years ago, many universities in the Netherlands, they were aware of thinking how to get money to do research. And they invented a kind of third income. Academic professors could teach not only inside university, but also outside. And for that lecturing, they looked for a new audience. And there was a wonderful institute in Paris, you might have heard of it, that's INSEAD, which is famous in Europe, and that's teaching, developing European leaders with academic knowledge. And the University of Groningen thought of founding a kind of leadership institute in which the academic professors could cooperate with the servants of institutions in the Netherlands, private and public, and to think together about leadership. What is wise government? Wise government. What is wise government? Where starts it? What do you have to change inside yourself, etc.? And they choose for that enterprise, which is a business, it's a private public enterprise, Comenius. Now, do you know who is Comenius? I mean, Margriet already introduced him as an important man, a thinker from the 1600s who came from the central of Europe. He was born in Moravia, which is a part of the Czech Republic nowadays. And he was trained as a philosopher, as a theologian, had a terrible life because he lived during the 80 Years' War in Europe, in which Catholics and Protestants were not at ease together. I mean, they had severe struggles, serious issues about which definition of Christianity is the right one, the Catholic or the Protestant. And one of these struggles between them was in the region around Prague. That's the capital now of the Czech Republic. And in Prague, there was the Catholic emperor who came from Vienna, the Habsburg, and he had a discussion with the aristocratic nobility of the Czech region, Bohemia, which was Protestant. And around 1620, you have to know that there was a very severe clash between Catholics and Protestants. And our Comenius man, he was a Protestant, he was really damaged by that war. He lost his family, he lost his house, his books. but his mind was still there. So he was free in thinking, and he moved around Europe and came to Groningen. Just after Groningen founded a university. That was in 1614. He stayed a few years there, but then traveled to Amsterdam, who was, of course, the capital of the world in those days. And there he met the elite of Amsterdam, and they offered him a studio with books to write. And he wrote, as Margriet already introduced, a book. It's called The Labyrinth, the World. The world is a complex whole, and how can you act wisely in that world? You have to look and to connect all the things that are interrelated. Never look about one thing as separate, isolated phenomenon. You have to check from a distance and to look to the patterns. When I act this, what's the reaction? And the second important thing that Comenius invented, it was a kind of thinking how to teach people. What is a good way to learn? And you remember perhaps that when we were young, we studied with books, with drawings. Well, when you went to school in the 15 or 1600s, in the Catholic or the Protestant world, or in the Islam world, you mainly had to study texts, but we are accustomed with drawings and photographs. And Comenius was the man who introduced in the way, in the methodology of learning pictures, drawings. And he said, well, you have to speak the language of the pupils. So don't use humanistic Latin to teach a youngster of 4, use language that he can understand. And then you will see that learning is open for everyone when you speak to him, when you really see and speak to him. And that's the father of, let's say, the way of teaching. And because of that, Comenius was taken for that school in Groningen, for that private public leadership school, as a kind of patron. He was the man from the 1600s who invented schooling. And I think that's a good choice, because leadership is what Comenius teaches us: openness, curiosity. Be open, think, do research, open your mind, open your heart for new thoughts. That's not easy. So that's something about the history of this leadership institute. Now, directing a leadership institute might suggest that I am an expert leader, which I'm not, and you noticed that already. So I'm really very impressed by the fact that you are already at this age interested in questions about personal leadership. I have to confess you that I think I was 50 when for the first time I asked myself what I am doing, how I'm doing that. Is that wrong or good? Can I do it better? How am I acting? Am I really listening to other people or not? What's my style of leadership? I directed in those days a museum in the Netherlands who that's called the National Open Air Museum. It's in Arnhem, and together with the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, we were designing the canon of the Dutch history. That was a complicated job, but that was a job. And the question, how do you do it? And what goes well and what goes wrong? And is there a relationship to my personal behavior or to my personal state of mind? Or is there a relationship to how I feel? I never thought of that. And you are already seeing that there's a connection between your action outside, your outward action, and your inward state of mind. And I really, as I told you, I'm impressed by the time you take of thinking about it, because it's very important. I think you're right to take time for this question. Now, how can you train perhaps leadership or personal leadership? Where does it start? What is the technique you have to dwell on? And what is before the technique, or below or above? I mean, that's the personality. And personal leadership is not a technique which you can learn at school. That's far more, as Viktor will discuss with you, it's inside yourself. It's your state of mind. Are you curious? Are you free to explore or not? I returned to my age some years ago when I got 50 years old. Then I went to Israel to travel around a little bit and alone. That's a very traditional thing. So when you're looking for yourself, it's a good thing to go into the world alone and to communicate with the world around you. There's no companion. The companion in your journey is the world, and you have to discuss with the world. And I went and on a day I went to Hebron, and Hebron is a very old town in the West Bank. In Arab, it's called El Khalil, and in Hebron there's a so-called tomb of Abraham. Abraham is in the religion of the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims a very central person, of course. He was the first in the line of monotheistic religion. And the tomb there, which was built by Herod, that's around the year 0, was taken over by Muslims. And tomb now, still there, is taken over by Orthodox Jews who want to take back the tomb of Abraham. So that's a very political, dangerous zone. And I went around and suddenly there came a Palestinian guy who said, well, do you want to see how they, the Israelis, destroyed our town? And then I suddenly remembered my mother telling me when I was young, never join strange man in his plans. That's dangerous. Stay away with that. That was the first thought. And then I thought, oh yeah, well, that's the old Pieter-Matthijs. But now there's a new Pieter-Matthijs who is without fear and who is curious to see what is perhaps difficult. So to explore the difficulties of life. 50, you are doing it today because it's far more interesting to watch Netflix now, but you're not doing that. So I went with that guy, and of course, he did not kidnap me, he didn't kill me, etc. It was a wonderful experience in which a student from the West Bank, from Hebron, El Khalil, showed me a cry for freedom. And I could have missed it when I listened to the voice of my mother inside, which hindered my freedom, so to say. Now, this aspect, are you capable of freeing yourself from something? That will be the theme of Viktor's lecturing, going to the European values. So Comenius, as a leadership institute, is focusing on you, on people, on the question, how free are you? Or what is important for you? My last remark is this. So when I was a little bit younger than most of you now, so let's say 17, 18, I went in the Netherlands to a school which was founded by Jesuits. Jesuits are Catholic priests. There's a society that was founded in the 1500s. And that's a quite famous company for school methods. They started their schooling just before Comenius. So Comenius is in the 1600s in the Protestant world, and the Jesuits started in the 1500s in the Catholic world. But both Catholics and Protestants in their schooling were focusing on the quality inside the pupil, inside yourself. And the Jesuits designed for that a wonderful method, which is called the spiritual exercise. That's a kind of meditation, which you do several, I think 4 or 5 times a day, in which you take a text, and of course, in the original context, that was a text taken from the Bible, but you can take a text from the Quran or Plato or Aristotle. You can take whatever good text, and you focus on the words, on the lines, and you repeat it again and again. And then a kind of mantra starts within yourself. And it sounds a little bit odd, but then you transplant yourself from your actual place into the text you are reading. You are a participant in the context of the text. I hope I'm still clear. Might be not the case, but so you leave the world, the actual world, and you go into the world of that literary fragment. And then you see elements in the text which you perhaps never saw before. And you notice that you are inspired by certain words, and you're frustrated by other words. And you have to check exactly these states of the soul. What does give me positive energy and what does give me a negative energy? And when you check that several times a day, there comes very clear to your mind what is important for you and what is not important for you. And then the Jesuit trick is this. So when you see that you get positive feelings with these words or thoughts or actions, then is that telling you who you are? And perhaps it's suggesting the path you should follow. And the very elemental question is then this. So what does interest you? What is it telling about yourself? What is it explaining about yourself? So the next thing is, so what am I going to do? I'm going to follow the positive way that I experienced by myself by checking out possibilities. And I leave the negative thing. And this very old method of detecting, checking yourself, who am I? We're all different. What is my purpose in life? It's a very difficult question, of course, on the Saturday afternoon, but that's one of the main questions. And am I free to detect, to explore that, and to follow my way? That's leadership. And when you are, and that's an opinion Comenius exercised quite a lot of, when the personal situation is okay, when you know your qualities and your problems, you are capable of being aligned, then your professional work is successful. When these things are not balanced, you will have difficulties. Difficulties are good because difficulties we will have them every day in every situation, but how to manage them. So you already started about thinking about personal leadership, the way you are acting, the way you're doing it. The I think that you all have the feeling that you can change your personal leadership, that you can influence it, and that's true. You're of course a person with a DNA, with a very clear identity, but that's not in concrete. It's dynamic. You can influence that. You can influence yourself, even when you're older. And believe me, this Comenius Leadership Institute, most of the participants are above 40, 45, 50, and they all have the question, who am I? Am I doing the right thing? And the thing that I'm doing, is the way I treat it, the way I act, is that wise? Is it wise enough? And can it be better? And what is it better? And that question is always there. It will never end. And when you think, I'm perfect, then it's done. Then you're on the wrong way. Nobody's perfect. So your interest in personal leadership, it's wonderful. Do the path, check yourself, and construct perhaps a context in which you can refer to. I mean, and what is good and bad? Who are the examples you are looking at? Who is inspiring you? And what do I think of my parents, of the priest, of the imam, of the rabbi, of the I don't know what? What are they telling? What I'm thinking myself? What's my personal view of them? Now, Europe, we Europeans, that is what I experienced in many travels abroad. People in Russia, in the Middle East, in China, they all think that we Europeans, we are like this, we are like that. So they have a very clear opinion on what Europeans are and what European leadership is. And then I came home and I thought, European leadership, I really don't know what is European leadership. We are the warmongers. We Europeans, we invented the most awful wars. We invented the genocide. We invented the Holocaust. We are quite ugly as Europeans, and we are colonial experts, etc., etc. So the first association with European leadership, is not that good at all. On the other hand, so many people outside Europe want to live inside Europe. So there's something in modern Europe which is great, very attractive. What is that? Are we as Europeans attractive? Are our social systems attractive? Is our society attractive? What is it? And then the next thing, and then it's up to Victor, is Europe a construct that is invented and practiced by politicians in Brussels, or I don't know where, or is Europe because I'm a European and I'm contributing to European mentality? So what is again the Jesuit question? What is your job you have to do inside Europe? How European are you? And what is European? Now, Victor told me that the European Union some decades ago designed 6 principal values. And these values are more than elements of binding states together. They could go deeper and can be perhaps interpreted as a reference for myself as a European leader or a European human being. Because leaders, first we have to be a wise human, a wise man, wise woman. That's the first thing we have to do. And that's quite difficult. I will ask Victor if he's ready to take over.
Hey guys, good afternoon. So glad you're all here. To be honest, I was quite impressed with how many of you showed up today. And actually, the first thing I want to say is that you have already demonstrated a very important leadership skill, which is curiosity. If you're not curious, you're never going to learn anything. So the fact that you are all here is already, you have demonstrated to yourself that you have leadership potential in you. Now, the man who just spoke, that is indeed my father. I am Viktor Gijsbers. I work for Comenius on the European Values Leadership Program. And I work there because we honor a great tradition of a particular European value, which is nepotism. And that's a joke. I also have something to offer, hopefully, to you today. I studied at Leiden University College. And I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about leadership in the context of our European values. Now, I heard that many of you are students of European studies. So probably most of you should be or are familiar with the 6 European values, the values that the EU says that are very important. Now, these are, of course, human dignity, democracy, equality, freedom, human rights, and the rule of law. Now, if we're going to talk about all these values today, we're going to be here next year. So what I want to do is talk about one of them, which is freedom, and discuss a little bit if we can look at this value and if it can mean something for us. Because, of course, there are many angles to look at leadership and look at leadership values, right? You can look at religion or reason, like I hear you have talked about in the previous session. You can look at family or at politics or the environment. But of course, many of us are also European citizens. And as European citizens, we're part of a union of values, or at least that is what it says it is. So we have these 6 values, and I want to look at one, which is freedom. And now the question is, can this big European value of freedom, can that also mean something for personal leadership? And how do you start even with such a big concept as freedom? So what I want to do is, I want to start at the top, which is where we look at the relationship between the value of freedom at the highest level, which is the level of the EU, which is the relationship between the state and the citizen. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take metaphorical elevator down. We're going to look at freedom between people, and then we're going to look at freedom within yourself, which is the final floor, the basement. All right. So let's see. let's start with what the EU says about freedom. The EU says freedom of movement gives citizens the right to move and reside freely within the Union. Individual freedoms, such as respect for private life, freedom of thought, religion, assembly, expression, and information, are protected by the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. That's what the EU briefly says about freedom. That's a little bit abstract. That's a little bit hard to, it's not very concrete. You can find all the rights, by the way, in the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights, which is an interesting thing to do as a European citizen. Look at all your rights. I highly recommend that. So let's start at the top. Freedom is guaranteed by the state for its citizens, for us. Now, this level of freedom is also known as liberty. And you know it maybe from the phrase of the French Revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternité. Now, here's the interesting thing about freedom between the government and you, the citizen. It is a right. It is a means to an end, and the government has to protect this right for you. But in order to protect that right for you, it has to actually make rules and borders, maybe even, and restrict your freedom. So in order to protect your freedom, you have to restrict your freedom. Now that's a bit contradictory, right? One of the ways that you can see that this becomes a problem is, for example, in privacy and safety, freedom and safety. Now, in order to protect your safety, you have to stop evil people from doing bad things to you, right? From taking your property, or maybe stop terrorists from planning attacks. But if you want to stop terrorists from planning attacks, you have to know what they're planning. And in order to know what they're planning, maybe you have to break privacy. You have to invade people's privacy to listen to what they're saying. So it's not necessarily easy for these freedoms to all exist. You need, in order to protect the freedom of the life of some people, maybe you have to control the freedom in another sense, and be able to investigate what people are saying. But then, of course, now you are taking the freedom of privacy. You're listening to what I'm saying, and I don't want that. So that's the highest level, and that's like I'm saying, it's not necessarily evident that that is simple and easy, right? These values are always conflicting with each other. So remember that. So that is the first level, the level between the state that protects your right to freedom, which you can use to do whatever you want to do. Not whatever you want to do, of course. Which brings us to the second level. We're going to take the elevator one floor down. We're going to look at freedom between people. Now, the government has granted you freedom. You are more or less free in Europe. Do what you want. What are you going to do? One of the things you can do is you can offend people, right? You have a freedom of speech. So you can use that to be very mean to people. But actually, if you do that, you're not going to make a lot of friends. You're going to make your own life pretty difficult if you're going to do that all the time. So actually, when you look at it, freedom between people is that you cannot be completely free. You have to restrain yourself. You cannot say everything you want. You cannot blurt everything out, because you will damage yourself and maybe your career chances. So you have to watch a little bit of what you say. Otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of friends. Another way to look at it, freedom between people, is social conventions, right? Social constructs, maybe even heard this term before. There are certain ways in which people expect things from you or think about you that make you not entirely free, identity-wise or otherwise. So between people, there are also constraints. You have to watch what you do with your freedom to other people. In other words, my freedom ends where your freedom begins, right? Do not do unto others as treat others as you want to be treated, right? So that's the second level, which is not law. There are no laws that say the law says you can offend everyone. But between one person and another person within the law, you also have to maybe restrain your freedom a little bit in order to get along. Okay, that's the second level. Now we're going to go down to what I think is the most important level, especially when it comes to leadership. And the lowest level is about, are you free within yourself? Now, what does that mean? It means that, for example, you make a plan, and the final moment you think, well, I don't really feel like it. Actually, I want to watch Netflix. I'm not going to go there. Who is that voice that is telling you to do that? Is that you? Or is that maybe your brain that is saying, well, I'm a little bit tired, I don't want to go? Another example. Maybe you have a plan to eat healthy, but you walk through the supermarket and you see something very delicious. You think, oh, screw the healthy food. I'm going to go for the nice, tasty food. I want to feel good. I want to get some ice cream. Who is in charge there? Are you in charge, or is your stomach in charge? Right? So the question here is, are you leading yourself, or is your stomach leading you, or your brain, or maybe your heart or something? So the question here is, and this is also the question that I want to ask you guys, is in order to lead others, first you need to be able to lead yourself. And how good are you at leading yourself? And maybe what is necessary to lead yourself? What are the obstacles to leading yourself? I want to thank everyone for your wonderful contributions. And hopefully you've learned a bit. We didn't talk a lot about Europe, maybe next time. But I think we talked a lot about leadership and how leadership in the great world starts with leadership of yourself. And how you can look at your own freedom in the context of great freedom. It starts with small freedoms of yourself, right? So I want to thank everyone again, and I wish you all very good luck with your studies, and very good luck with this difficult and crazy Corona time. And hopefully I'll see you guys again.